Dawn hadn't even broken when the Apache died with a sound no mechanic wanted to hear, a sudden, hollow click instead of the roar of life. The flight line of FOB Ember Point lay in a muted wash of blues and grays, every surface damp with night chill, the desert air holding its breath before sunrise. At 0440 hours, the only movement came from technicians pacing around Viper 6, the attack bird that should have been spinning up for pre-mission warm-ups. Instead, its cockpit screens were dead, its engines silent, its posture strangely wounded. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from, and who's the hero in your family. Staff Sergeant Cole Delvin stood closest to the fuselage, jaw tight, shoulders slumped, wiping at a streak of grease on his cheek without realizing he was doing it again. He muttered to a junior mechanic to run the cold start sequence one more time. The junior hesitated, then pressed the ignition. Another hollow click, no Apu cough, no energy spike on the panel, just failure, clean and complete. Delvin swore under his breath. The Apache had officially hit no-go status, and for the first time in months, he didn't know what to do next. The rescue team waiting on standby wouldn't launch without an armed escort. Viper 6 was the only bird configured for the role. Without it, the entire operation stalled, and every mechanic on Ember Point knew it. Commander Grant arrived just before 500 boots, crunching on gravel, face carved by exhaustion. Warlock Actual never raised his voice, but the weight in his silence pressed down harder than any shouted order. He scanned the dead aircraft, then the huddled crew. "Status," he demanded. Delvin swallowed, "Sir. We've pulled the logs, run diagnostics twice. We've got a PDM failure feeding fault code 923 alpha. It's frying itself on every startup attempt. I don't know why." Grant stepped closer to the Apache, placing a hand on the cold metal. "Mission prep window closes in 1 hour." He didn't need to say the rest. They all felt it. They tried again. Another team lugged over a thermal scope to scan the wiring harness. A pair of avionics techs crawled beneath the fuselage, muttering about inconsistent readings. Someone called out for a multimeter check on the secondary feed. Even in the dim pre-dawn, the crew's embarrassment was visible. This was supposed to be routine. A cold start sequence shouldn't melt a power distribution module. Captain Rhea Solis, Viper 6's pilot, stood a few paces back, arms crossed, hiding a limp she hadn't shaken from an old crash. Her eyes tracked every failed attempt, jaw clenched with a mix of protectiveness and dread. Another click, another failure, another round of muttered frustration. Grant exhaled through his nose, then turned away from the crew and pulled out his radio. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "Bring her in." The mechanics exchanged uneasy glances. Delvin stiffened. He knew exactly who her meant. At 0540, headlights swept across the gravel access road. A transport truck rolled to a stop, and a woman stepped down, boots touching the earth with the certainty of someone who had walked this ground too many times already. Mara Kadironhand, to anyone who had ever heard the stories, looked older than Delvin remembered from training vids. Not weak or just tempered, like steel quenched in fire. She wore her fatigue jacket open, gloves clipped to her belt, and her expression carried neither urgency nor doubt. Just understanding. No one spoke at first. The crew parted as she approached Viper 6, the dead bird looming before her. She touched the fuselage with the back of her knuckles, as if greeting an old friend. Delvin stepped forward, arms folded, defensive. "Ma'am, we've already run full diagnostics. Logs don't make sense. Nothing's lining up." Mara didn't look at him. "Show me what you did," he bristled. "With respect, we did everything by the book." "That's the problem," she said, calm as stone. Grant nodded at her to proceed. Delvin backed off, seething, but Solus watched her with a quiet, aching hope. Mara perched on the skid, eyes scanning the cockpit. "Your readings are too clean," she murmured. If this were a standard PDM failure, the system would have thrown a cascade of faults, not a single 9-3 alpha. "Something upstream is confusing the power tree." Delvin stiffened. "We checked upstream." "You checked what you expected to find," she replied, "not what's there." She asked for a multimeter. Hale, the youngest tech, sprinted to hand it to her before Delvin could move. Mara crouched beside the bay panel, disconnected a harness, and touched the leads, her brow furrowed. "These numbers don't match your thermal reading," she said, holding the device out for Grant to see. Delvin leaned over. "That doesn't make sense. We scanned it twice, then scanned again." Her voice was soft, but the authority in it sliced clean. They scanned again. The thermal scope showed inconsistent heat patterns, far cooler than a normal burn from overload. Mara ran her fingers along the harness until she reached a tiny crimp mark near the junction. She lifted it slightly, revealing a faint discoloration underneath. "There," she whispered. "Your burn isn't from overheating. It's from a misalignment that shouldn't exist." "That's impossible," Delvin said. "I installed that myself." Mara finally looked him in the eyes. "Everyone misses something eventually. Even me." There was a weight behind the words that silenced his next protest. Grant stepped in. "Can you fix it?" "Not yet," Mara answered. "This isn't the source. It's a symptom. Something deeper upstream is feeding unstable voltage. You patch this, you burn the next module. Viper 6 hasn't just failed. She's telling you a story." She stood, brushing dust from her palms. "You just haven't learned how to listen." Solus approached, voice low. "Is she salvageable?" Mara studied the Apache for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "She wants to fly, but she's been hurt more than you think." For the next half hour, Mara moved with deliberate precision, asking fewer questions than the crew expected, but each one cut straight to the problem. She traced inconsistencies in the logs, found mismatched readings between the flight computer and the auxiliary bus, and noted a subtle delay in the cold start sequence timings the others had ignored. Every minute, the window narrowed. Every minute, Delvin grew quieter, watching her with a mix of resentment and dawning respect. Somewhere around 0600, the sky began to glow at the edges, but Viper 6 remained stubbornly lifeless. Grant checked his watch. "We're running out of time." Mara didn't look up. "Then we stop guessing and start understanding. This failure isn't random. The question is whether you're ready to hear what the bird's been hiding." The crew exchanged anxious glances as she reached deeper into the Apache's wounded circuitry, her eyes sharpening with the hint of a discovery that would change everything in the hours to come. She straightened slowly, a new certainty settling across her features as she whispered, "There's a pattern here, and it's worse than you think." That realization would lead directly into the next chapter, where the hidden chain of failures begins to reveal itself. Mara slid under the Apache's fuselage like she was greeting an old friend risen from the dead. The sun had begun its slow climb, throwing thin gold lines across the maintenance pit 12 meters from the hangar's main door. At 0640 hours, the air was warming but still carried the sting of early morning, the kind that made metal smell sharp and unforgiving. Behind her, the crew clustered in uneasy silence, Delvin with arms crossed and jaw set. Hale, watching with honest curiosity, Solis perched in the cockpit, breathing through her tension in shallow, shaky rhythms. Mara moved without hurry. Years of muscle memory guided her hands over access panels and junction locks, her fingers brushing the Apache's underbelly with a strange gentleness. She pointed at a char streak along the wiring harness. "This burn," she said quietly, "isn't from overheating. It's directional." The heat traveled sideways, not along the load path. Delvin crouched beside her. "We scanned it last night. Thermal signature matched an overload." "It matched what you thought you were looking for," she replied, sliding the multimeter into place. "Look again." The result popped in bold color. The heat signature. She tapped the screen. This is not how a PDM failure behaves. Someone forced a voltage spike upstream. Delvin blinked. Forced, as in human error. Or hidden damage. Mara's voice was measured, neutral, offering no accusation. Yet Delvin felt the sting anyway. She wormed deeper along the fuselage, every motion efficient, deliberate. At her back, the avionics team exchanged uncertain glances. Their earlier frustration had cooled into a reluctant awe. Mara was doing more in 15 minutes than they had in hours. Solis leaned out of the cockpit. "If the burn isn't from overheating, what does that mean for Viper 6? Mara didn't answer immediately. She unfastened another panel, eyes narrowing at the components tucked inside. "It means," she said finally, "your bird's collapse started long before the PDM fried." The words hung heavy. Delvin bristled at the implication that all their diagnostics had been chasing ghosts. "We followed procedure. If something was wrong earlier, the logs should have caught it. The logs only know what the software can interpret," Mara said. "But the aircraft always knows the truth first." For a moment, none of them spoke. The pit hummed around them, a quiet tension building with every second the mission clock bled away. Mara reached the next junction module, running the multimeter leads along its contacts. The reading spiked, then dipped, then stabilized at a number that made her stop cold. "This is wrong," she murmured. "This entire segment is running off an orphaned data bus." Delvin frowned. "Impossible. That bus was deprecated in the last block update. That's why it's a problem." Mara eased the module free and held it up. It was a relay stamped with a revision number none of them expected. "You're running a Rev-C relay on a block that requires Rev-D. The software can't communicate with it reliably." Hale's eyes widened. "But our supply records." "Were wrong," Mara finished. "Or someone grabbed the nearest replacement without checking compatibility." She sighed, not blaming, merely acknowledging reality. One mismatched relay won't kill a bird, but in the wrong place. She tapped the scorch mark beneath the panel. It becomes the first domino. Delvin's cheeks flushed with heat and pride. "We checked every relay. Did you check the ones you didn't think could be wrong?" Mara asked softly. Delvin fell silent. She continued, tracing the chain of failures, marking each inconsistency. Following the ghost trail through Viper 6's wounded systems, the crew watched as if she were translating a language only she could hear. Her voice steadied the uncertainty swirling around them, even as the stakes climbed with every discovery. "At 0730, she called out, "Solis, power up the avionics only, the base stack." Solis inhaled sharply. "You think it'll hold?" "It won't," Mara said. "But I need to see how it fails." The moment Solis powered the avionics, the cockpit flickered. Warning lights flared, dimmed, flared again. A faint whine rose, then the fire control computer entered a reboot cycle, restarting itself in frantic, uneven loops. The FCR loop message flashed repeatedly across the darkening screen. Hale shouted from the pit, "It's restarting every 4 seconds." Mara climbed to her feet. "And it'll get faster." "That's the second failure." Delvin stared at the blinking cockpit, disbelief cutting through his irritation. "How did we miss this? We never saw a reboot loop." "Because the cold start never got this far," Mara said. "The first failure blocked the second." She looked up at Solus, whose hands trembled faintly on the controls. "Your targeting system is next, and when that goes, we lose the mission." Solus swallowed, her voice tight. "Then tell us how to stop it." Mara stepped into the center of the crew, her presence strangely grounding. "First, you understand it. The Apache isn't collapsing, it's trying to protect itself. It's isolating corrupted pathways, rerouting around damage, shutting down systems before they overload. This chain of failures didn't start today. It's been building for weeks." The revelation hit the crew like a gut punch. Hale looked ashamed. Delvin looked furious with himself. "Someone should have caught this earlier," he muttered. "Doesn't matter now," Mara said. "What matters is this. Viper 6 is not suffering a single malfunction. She's unraveling from the inside out. And this?" She gestured to the frantic reboot cycle. "This is only the beginning." Solus climbed out of the cockpit, face pale. "Can she be saved?" Mara held her gaze. "Yes, but not with the usual fixes." She pointed to the Rev C relay. "This mismatch shouldn't exist. The burn pattern shouldn't exist. The orphaned bus shouldn't exist. These failures don't line up unless something deeper is causing them." Delvin exhaled shakily. "So, what are we dealing with?" Mara looked at each of them, one by one, her voice low and steady. "A chain reaction, hidden, layered, intelligent in how it masks itself. And until we find the root, every fix we make will only make things worse." Silence pressed in, heavy and unfamiliar. Even Delvin, stubborn as ever, didn't argue. Mara turned back toward the aircraft, her expression sharpening into resolve. "We're not fighting a malfunction," she said. "We're hunting a cause, and that hunt would lead them into the final discovery waiting in the next chapter." The hangar fell silent the moment Mara whispered. "Found it." She said it so softly that Hale almost missed it, but the stillness around Viper 6 made the words land like a flare. It was just past 900 hours, pale morning light slanting through the half-open hangar doors, dust hanging in the beams like suspended breath. The crew froze where they stood, Delvin beside the toolbox, Solus leaning from the cockpit, Hale clutching a binder of diagnostics he no longer trusted. Mara knelt deep in the maintenance bay, shoulders squared, her hand resting near a narrow conduit running beneath the secondary power rail. Her eyes were fixed on a hair-thin, line-jagged metallic, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She traced the microfracture with a fingertip, feeling the subtle ridge rather than seeing it. "This," she said, "is why nothing is behaving. Every surge hits this crack first. The MA stack resets because it thinks the core bus is collapsing. It's not software, it's this." She sounded tired but certain. Certain in the way only someone who'd seen this failure before could be. Delvin stepped closer, wiping his hands on his uniform. He hesitated. "A microfracture, but the thermal scans missed it," Mara replied, "because the load didn't spike evenly. It flickered. A hairline gap opens under strain, closes when it cools, looks clean to every tool, unless you're looking for a stutter in the APU live feed." Her voice softened, which none of you knew to look for. That stung him. Everyone felt it. But Delvin only nodded, jaw tight, pride bleeding into reluctant respect. Solus climbed down from the cockpit ladder, boots thudding softly on the deck. If that rail had blown under flight load, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Mara glanced up, meeting her eyes, and saw the fear buried there, the fear of losing her aircraft, of failing the mission, of watching something irreplaceable die. "It didn't blow," Mara said gently, "but it will if we try to bring it online without a fix." She angled herself deeper beneath the panel, and we're out of time. Commander Grant will want a status in minutes. We're doing a hot splice hail, sucked in a breath. A live power splice? Under the rail, we've barely got clearance. It's the only way, Mara said. We keep the APU on idle, isolate the section, and splice a bypass strip. 5 minutes from cut to closure, her voice was steady, but her fingers carried an old tremor. Delvin knelt beside her. "You've done this before." "Once," she said quietly, "didn't finish in time. Pilot paid for it." She pushed the memory aside. "We won't repeat that today." The team snapped into motion hail, bringing the insulated strip. Solus steadying the light, Delvin gripping the rail clamp with shaking hands. Mara slid under Viper 6, the Apache's belly looming above. "Start the countdown when I cut. If the feed wavers, call it out." "Understood," Delvin said. She inhaled and sliced into the damaged rail. The live current hummed like a drawn breath. "Stability normal," Solus called from the cockpit. Mara exposed the fractured thread, whispering, "Timer. 5 minutes. Mark." She placed the bypass strip, her hands finally steady, clamp Delvin past it. She bonded the splice as Solus warned APU rising 30 over. "It'll settle," Mara said, sealing the final clamp. 1 minute. Seal complete. Solus rechecked the systems. Displays steadied, all boards green. Viper 6 is alive. Commander Grant stepped in. Mara, "I don't know how you did it." She wiped her hands on a rag. "Didn't do it alone." Delvin stepped forward. "Oh, ma'am, but we couldn't have done it without you." Mara gave him a small nod, the kind that meant more than any salute. Solus eased the Apache into a hover 2 meters above the deck. 15 seconds of perfect balance. Dust spun in tight spirals beneath the aircraft. The sound filled the hangar like a heartbeat, finally returning to life. When the test was complete, Mara turned away from the rising sun and walked toward the exit. Her legend restored, her ghosts acknowledged, her job done. And none of them knew that the next crisis was already on its way.